This is our next segment in practical how-tos for the Montessori classroom. Whether you're in a homeschool setting, a regular school, a childcare with a Montessori school, you're going to have to manage certain things. And I am at this point going to mention that the things that I'm talking about in this segment, as well as I have in other segments about the materials, rotating them, storing them, that is classroom management from my perspective. You manage your materials, you manage the records, you manage the time and any kind of a rotation through responsibilities that you might be doing with the children, but you don't manage children. You lead children, you guide children, you model for children the behavior that's appropriate, but you manage the materials. So in this segment, we're going to talk about managing the dirt. Now, if you're in a 3 to 6 classroom, a children's house, there's a good chance that you're going to have several children who are very interested in practical life, who, whether you have anything that actually needs dusting in the classroom or not, want to be dusting, particularly if you're using your practical life material and you're setting up your practical life areas in the way that you should. No matter what your classroom age group is, even if you have toddlers, the core of your practical life area needs to be the self-care and the care of the environment for the children of the age that are in your classroom. And so obviously what a toddler can do is very much different from what a 7-year-old or a 10-year-old can do. They all should be taking part in cleaning their own classrooms and keeping them clean. And that's what this segment is about. Do self-care in a different segment. That's not classroom management. So one of the things I have found tends to get away from teachers and tends to be a problem is dusting in particular. Now, if things are getting dusty because the children aren't using them, that's a signal to you. That's something you need to be paying attention to. And so if you're going to use the system that I'm going to describe, that's not going to happen so much typically if you're doing it well. So that is a feedback for you. And I've heard one of the trainers that I've had the privilege of studying with mention that, and I thought, well, that's kind of a problem with the dusting system that I have because nothing gets that dusty. But it is still worthwhile to have a way to keep the classroom dust-free, but it does mean you need to monitor what's being used and what's not, because anything that's not, you need to be presenting it more or get it out of there. So how do you keep the whole classroom dust-free? As I mentioned, if you're in a 3 to 6 classroom, there's a good chance that you're going to have children that just want to dust. If you have dusting work out, they are going to want to do it. But one of the things I have found, even in that situation, when you do have several children who have that interest going on all year round, because you might, and you may have it fade and ebb and flow, so there are times when it's not that interesting to anybody, but even if you have that interest going on here all year round, how do you make sure the whole classroom gets dusted and not just maybe the shelves nearest the dusting materials or the shelves nearest the window or whatever it is that just is most naturally attracts a child to dust it? Well, I'm going to suggest that one of the things that you can do is have a little rotating signal. So I have used little glass pebbles. They're used to in potting flowers. They can be used to hold stems in place. If you're arranging flowers, some people use them if they're going to force bulbs. So they're just little glass pebbles. Green is a pretty common color. You also can see glass marbles, but those roll away. So these are flat. They will sit on the shelf. And so one of the things that you can do to have as part of your dusting work is that when a child does dusting, they take the little pebbles with them, and once they've dusted a shelf, they put a pebble on it. So say they decided that they want to dust, and if you have the little low shelves and you've got sections of about this size, and they do 6 shelves. So they do 1, 2, 3 here, and then 1, 2, 3 here. They would take 6 pebbles, put 1 on each shelf, and then when the next child is ready to dust, they would look for the pebbles, they would look for the shelves that don't have them, and they would dust those. Then the end of the week, you collect the pebbles, or ideally, if you do have some kind of formal Let's do a final restoration on a Friday, which is appropriate if it's not taking too long, doesn't take too much away from the self-chosen work. I think it can be appropriate. You can have the children collect them all up, and then you start again fresh at the beginning of the year. Now, if you're finding that you're not getting all the shelves done, then you may need to stick some Post-it notes or do something so that you can have that rotation keep going. But that's what I suggest in terms of managing it in the 3 to 6 classroom. Once you get into the 6 to 9 classroom, the 9 to 12 classroom, usually don't have as many children that are that interested in doing that, and they have other work that's probably more important for them to be doing. So how do you manage that? Well, I've done a bunch of different things with this, and for the most part, I've found they like to visit while they dust. If you allow them to just visit and dust, they'll take all morning. So sometimes you do need to contain this a little bit. But I have found, even when I gave them the choice that they could get their dusting done anytime during the week, or they could do it on Friday mornings, a lot of times Friday mornings is how we ended up doing it. And a lot of the schools that I have worked with, Fridays are a little bit different. Either there's a studio art period in the afternoon, which can be really nice, a nice way that if you are going to have some opportunities that you can only offer certain times, guest teachers coming in, or the setup for art that is not something that the children can just initiate on their own, that can be a good way to manage it. And so then part of the morning time is the restoration of the environment, and the afternoon time is special studio art, whatever. So if you're going to do it that way, the thing that has absolutely worked best for me is to have a shelf assigned to each of some other classroom responsibilities that the children rotate through. So let's say we have a PE helper and a master of ceremonies. That's who runs the class meetings, is the person in charge of kind of calling on people and all that, and a lunch host. And so those 3 jobs, let's say, are next to one another on a job chart. Then those 3 children perhaps are responsible for the geometry shelf and the art shelf, or maybe just the geometry shelf. What you kind of have to do if you're going to do it this way is you need to look at the number of children typically there on the day you dust. So if you have a lot of absences and things, don't count the number of children in your class, count the numbers that are typically there on that day, and then you divvy up the dusting work among that many children. And then you have those shelves where they kind of rotate through. Now, some of the classes I've had, they just wanted to dust one shelf for a long time. That's okay too. I also took the little badges that they use at for conventions, not the ones that you pin on, but the ones that are on just a little stretchy thing, and then you've got the little plastic case, and I put each of the shelves on those, and so when it was their turn to do the shelves, they could have that. So if we had the rotating thing, they just used a chart. If we were doing a little bit more freeform, where maybe they got to choose shelves, we use the little badges to let them choose. So these are ways that I have made sure that the shelves get dusted on a regular basis. Let's talk about let's talk about some ways that we can actually get the dusting done. Now, I am a huge fan of microfiber cloths. Now, at this point, most people know what they are. I'm going to show you one. It's from a company called eCloth, and it is the kind that I recommend for things like cleaning tabletops and for cleaning glass or anything that is going to tend to leave smudges on it. Now, this is the kind that's good for tabletops. It can be used for dusting. They're a little pricey, and so I'll talk to you about what I do. Now, this is the kind that eCloth actually sells for dusting, and I have not used that with the children. I do end up having a couple usually, so that if I'm doing some dusting, I've got those handy. Now, what I do, and I don't do it because I don't sew much these days, but I have parents do it, is I have them make mitts. Now, depending on what age your children are, obviously these aren't ones that would fit completely on my hand, but if you do have children with hands that are much bigger or larger, they don't have to put the whole hand in there. They can put a few fingers. This is the e-cloth that is designed for use on glass. And so if you have clear plastic trays, if you actually are cleaning windows and things, these are great. And so this is the way that you sew them up. You cut the full-size cloth. So here's the size of a full-size e-cloth, and the ones for glass I think are a little bit bigger. So you cut them up into about double this size, sew up the seams, and then if you want them to look a little bit nicer, you can turn them so that the seams are inside. But the children love them, and they are much better at dusting. And I am going to say that the boys, when they have the mitts, do a much better job than they do when they just have the cloths, because it's just not easy for them to manage them just with a cloth. I would suggest for dusting the very inexpensive microfiber cloths. I get them at Costco. I'm probably guessing Sam's Club, other places like that have them as well. Those are fine for dusting. And so then how do you manage the cloths? Well, what I do is once I have a parent sew them up, then I get one of those net laundry bags. We've been talking about dusting, I'm not going to talk too much about using them on tables, but I will mention that the e-cloths are the ones that I use to clean the tabletops after snack and things, especially if you have peanut allergies, other things like that. These are the ones to use wet on your tables. And I do suggest that you have the children dampen them. Don't have them, even if you use a spray bottle, spray the cloth or the mitts. Don't spray the tables, because then you don't have to worry about your materials getting wet. Then, how do you manage the cloths? So if you are doing the damp ones for things like snack or lunch cleanup, have a place where they're hung over something. Ideally, you'll have your children wash them. Now, I still would suggest doing the second part I'm going to tell you in a minute, but if you do have some washing, this is perfect. Perfect for them to wash. Just make sure they don't use too much soap. You get too much soap in them and they're not going to work the way that they're supposed to. But even if the children are washing them, I suggest then when they're dry, so if they're using them wet, they're going to hang them on a drying rack so that when you send them home with the parent, they're all dry. So then once they're all dry, the dust cloths that you use on Friday typically have been dry the whole time. You put them all in the net bag, send them home with one of your parent volunteers, and then they come back clean on Monday. Now, I do suggest that my parents put a cup of white vinegar in, because you don't want to use bleach. It will destroy or at least break down the fibers. Hot water, detergent, but not a gritty detergent, and vinegar, and they will come clean beautifully, even if they did get a little bit stinky. But ideally, you don't let that happen. You have the children lay them out after they've been rinsed out. So this is one of the ways I found that I can manage the classroom. Great on the environment, reusable cloths, water, rinsing them out, only washing thoroughly with lots of detergents, or not even a lot of detergent, but with some detergent once a week. This is a great way where you can keep the classroom clean. The children are doing the work, almost all of the work, and you're doing it in such a way that you are able to make sure that everything stays clean, but the children are doing it. Now, I am going to mention a couple of other things. I do know some people like terry cloth. I like terry cloth for mopping up the spills on the floor. So again, I think it's probably the automotive section of Costco, where you can get the big packages of the microfiber cloths. They also tend to have just a terry cloth set of cloths. I do like to have those so that if children spill things on the floor, particularly water, they can just mop them up. I don't find that the terry cloth is as good for dusting because it leaves little bits behind. I don't find dusters are that good. Now, if you do have stuff getting into corners, if you have these little mitts, the children's fingers in the corner of the mitt can get a lot of it, but you can also have a little brush. Something like a mushroom brush is really good for them to get into the little corners if they need to. Also, a stiff paintbrush, one that's, would leave a pretty good texture in a thick paint, those are also good for that. And I'm going to suggest that if you use these different ideas, you can keep the classroom clean, the children are responsible for it, you're using your parent volunteers in a responsible way, you're being environmentally responsible, and you get to enjoy a clean classroom.
A lot of the kindergarten teachers tell me
Okay, you want to show the multiplication board also?
time they do it in trial one, it takes them 5 minutes, and then they put it through a second time, they'll put it in maybe 4.5 minutes, and you actually get a learning curve before they get to see their own rate of learning, which is very self-motivating. But then, always the right answer. There are other things that are unique about the hard board that you can point out, because sometimes they discover themselves, like if you look at the nines, if you add up all of the digits in the nines table, they always add up to 9, which is nice. And as the kids work with it, there's a lot of discovery. Also, as they work with this, you're really beginning to understand multiples, which then sets the stage down to fractions.
One of the pitfalls of Montessori education, from what I have seen and experienced for myself repeatedly, is that many, if not most of us, do not take the time that we need for ourselves. Now, if you have seen the segment that I did on the research that I did for my master's program, Rejecting Exhaustion, you'll know that this was an area that Montessori educators cited as being essential to be effective in the classroom and to be willing to stay in the classroom. These were things that people found that they needed to do in order to be good classroom leads, good classroom assistants, good classroom educators. So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about this, the things that are important for us to do, how to choose what is important, how to structure it in your life, and what gets in the way. And the reason that I'm framing this one as a pitfall in this case is because I have found a very strong tendency in Montessori educators and in many women that I know and dearly love to put everyone else ahead of themselves. And that includes the self-care that would actually cause them to be able to serve those family members, those students, those communities better than they do when they're exhausted. So what gets in the way? Well, one of the things that I believe gets in the way is the mistaken belief that doing a little bit more classroom preparation or a little bit more planning of lessons or a little bit more reviewing of observations or a little bit more recording into an electronic record keeping program or a little bit more time spent refining a parent newsletter is more important than getting enough sleep. getting enough movement, getting enough time with your own family. And that is a mistaken assumption. Now, I'm not saying that those things aren't all important. I purposely chose things that I do believe are very important, and I believe help educators to be effective in the classroom, and in some cases, for some of the things I mentioned, will actually save them time and save problems later on. But if you're not fresh, if you don't have the physical and emotional and just psychic energy that you really need, there's no way you can do Montessori education well. And I think a lot of us fool ourselves about that. I think that we believe these tasks that are important are more important than those self-care rituals or self-care times. And everything that I have seen in the research, everything, including the people that I've talked to who've been doing Montessori education for many years, says that that's simply not true. So what else gets in the way? Because I do think the better that you understand why these things aren't happening, that's one of the natures of pitfalls, is if you really can look at them straight in the eye and understand why they're happening, then you can step around them and avoid them. So why else is this happening? Well, I think one reason also is because a lot of self-care things aren't as easy as some other things that happen and present themselves in our lives. Many years ago, I did I guess you could call it a training. It was a series of tapes that I did about time management, and there was someone in a seminar that the person presenting the seminar on tape referred to, and they had asked, well, why don't people do planning? Why don't people do things like reading books that they believe are very, very important? And one of the seminar respondents said, books don't ring. Well, I think that the time that I was listening to that, the only thing that rang was a telephone, and you picked it up or you didn't, and if you were outside, you didn't even hear it. And my goodness, that's not the case now. Now, not only does your telephone ring when your daughter is calling you or your neighbor or whatever, your telephone makes a sound if you have an email, your telephone makes a sound if someone you know has posted something on Facebook. Things ring all around you, and that, I believe, consumes our time in a way that is not serving us the best that it could. Now, in that research study that I did, one of the things that was mentioned as a strategy to make this happen, to make getting enough sleep, but especially to make exercise time with friends and family happen, is to set a time for it. Rather than it being, I'll do that as best I can, I'll get to it when I can, it becomes an appointment that is just as important, just as set as you being in your classroom on time to get that classroom ready for your children. So whether it's an early morning appointment or an appointment for immediately after school, or possibly even if you have a break in the middle of the day, a time to go walk in the middle of the day, this has to be an appointment that is just as important to you as being in that classroom on time to get it ready for your children and to be ready to greet them when they arrive. That is one of the essential ways to get around this pitfall. Now, I am going to say that particularly at some times, you're probably going to need to slight some self-care habits. If it is the first week of school and maybe you lost 2 students and got 2 new ones, or other unexpected things have happened, you may have to put some more time in, and actually that it will save you work later on. And particularly during those times, I would encourage you to really look at what is most important for you. I do think most of us, especially after we get to be a certain age, know whether or not sleep or movement or really healthy foods or drinking enough water, which of those habits really make that difference that makes a difference for us. And I would encourage you, make that one non-negotiable. If you know that when you get less than 6 or 7 hours sleep a night, you're just not a patient person, you just don't notice the things in the classroom you need to, sleep has got to be a priority even when things get crazy, even at parent-teacher conference time, even the first week of the school, the last week of school. that has to be a priority. So figure out what for you are those non-negotiable self-care strategies, and make sure even in the busiest times, those are part of your routines. But during the bulk of the school year, make sure appointments for all these things are part of your schedule. Movement time, time with family and friends, time to rest, not just to sleep. If you do these things, I think you will see that they will pay you dividends in the long run. That pitfall of not taking care of yourself takes a toll. And once you're exhausted, once you just really don't care anymore, that's something that a friend of mine said, is that she knows that she's got to do something different when she just feels like she doesn't care anymore. If you feel even the first tinges of that, take a step back, look at your schedule, look at what you need to do to make sure that when you go into that classroom, you're your best self, that you've modeled that respect for yourself. That is probably the thing I would say that I would leave you with, is that's what you're doing when you take care of yourself. You're modeling for those children. I need to make sure that my body's needs, my heart's needs are cared for. And so I'm going to do this in preparation of being my best self with you in the classroom.